Well, hello once again. Yes, it's me, Leonard Wells, broadcasting as usual and as ever from HASLINGDEN, north of Manchester in the UK, on Thursday the 22nd of December 2011. I heard on the wireless today a discussion between two politicians who had been around and had served, or knew very well, Mrs. Thatcher, who was once, of course, our Prime Minister. The first lady Prime Minister we've ever had. And I remember she came in after the government of James Callaghan, which had been supported by the Liberals, and we had what was called the Lib-Lab Pact. Not quite a coalition like we have now between the Liberals and the Conservatives, but they kept the government going until the last minute, and then they pulled the rug because things had got terribly out of hand, and we had what was called the winter of discontent, when rubbish wasn't being collected in the streets in some areas, and the people who dug the graves to bury people, I think in Liverpool, were on strike. So things were difficult. And Mrs. Thatcher came in, and I never forget that James Callaghan was very gracious in his praise of her achievement. And for a woman to take over the Conservative Party was quite remarkable. Now, I slightly suspect that they all admired her because she probably made them all feel that she was the boss, the nanny, if you like, the chief. And apart from being good looking, she was effective, decisive, tireless, worked hard, tried very hard, believed totally in what she was doing. But the problem was that she wouldn't listen to anybody else, and she kept going her own way. And in the process, dragged us into a war in the Falklands, which cost nearly 1,000 lives, not all ours. I think it was about 250 to 700 on the Argentinian side. We were dragged into that war, and it cost us a fortune. We came very close to losing it, very, very close. And it was described at the time, the Falklands War, as two bald men fighting over a comb. In other words, a rock that was of no use to anyone. On the back of the nationalistic feeling, and further, when the fleet arrived back victorious from the Falklands, Mrs. Thatcher set about defeating the miners and destroying the coal industry. Now, not long in the previous Conservative government, of course, we'd had Ernest Marples, who'd set about destroying the railways. He cut a third of the railway system, railways which we would now give our eye teeth to have back. And of course Ernest Marples, his family business was building roads. How coincidental. Well, a similar thing happened in America, you know. General Motors, which of course produced cars, set about buying up, in combination with oil companies and tyre manufacturers, the railways. They bought up railways and scrapped them. Now America is poor in railways, and they have to rely on planes pumping out carbon dioxide type fumes. We all remember the Hollywood films showing Americans taking the overnight train, say from Chicago down to Miami in Florida, or across to Los Angeles, the night trains. Those big trains where you could sit and have a drink and play music, and sleep. Well, they still had those kind of trains in Europe. And although we haven't quite got our act together in Europe yet, so that it's not, you can't yet get on a train in London and get off in Istanbul, but I'd like to see that day come. Now, we're coming a little bit far away from the subject, but Mrs. Thatcher, having set about and took on the miners and helped to fight the print unions, it needed it. I'm not saying she was totally slewed. Her approach wasn't totally correct. It was perhaps too far in one direction. Nevertheless, she went about, having succeeded in subduing the miners, she set about selling off all our assets and privatised things like British Gas and BT and parts of BP, British Petroleum, British Airways, and I'm not saying that they didn't improve, but we can hardly afford gas anymore, and if it hadn't been for the the cheap airlines coming onto the scene, we would still be paying fortunes for air travel, because at one time they were only the rich. They were the province of the rich. Ordinary working people couldn't afford airfares. It cost a fortune to go to Australia. It was all a cartel, rigged by governments. It was called IATA. It still exists. But of course, companies like Ryanair and EasyJet have given these big airlines so much competition that they've had to reduce their prices. I can fly regularly, as I'm about to do soon, on national airlines like Lufthansa for under £200 all the way to Romania. Although you can fly for a lot less if you're young enough and fit enough to put up with slightly less comfort. You can fly from Luton, for example, on Blue Air for £50 each way, £70 return in some cases. Well, what I'm coming to is these two members of, or participants in Mrs. Thatcher's government who were on the wireless were discussing strong rumours that the government were considering giving Mrs. Thatcher a state funeral when she dies. Of course, she hasn't died yet, so don't get me wrong. And one of the participants on this programme was of the opinion that she was too divisive of a character and that too many people would find it offensive to have her given a state funeral, especially as we're in a period of strict austerity. And of course he was quite right, because she was thrown out of office by her own party because she brought in the poll tax, the most hated of taxes ever foisted upon the British public. Even members of her own government warned her, but she wouldn't listen. She was determined, because it was a wonderful way of reducing the local taxes for the rich by making even the poor pay the same amount as the rich. What a clever ruse. And it didn't work, and she left Downing Street in tears. Now, the other participant in this radio programme was all for it. Oh, he thought she was probably the greatest Prime Minister we've ever had. Well, I've got friends who think that she will go down in history as one of our great Prime Ministers. I don't think she's on the same level or even in the same company as Winston Churchill. And one of the reasons I say that is partly because of the poll tax, because it was almost entirely her idea. She backed it to the hilt. The fact that she was great bosom friends of General Pinochet, the butcher of Chile, who'd bumped off thousands of his people in Chile in order to privatise the country. And she admired this greatly. She thought this was great. He dealt with the unions by force, the way she had with the miners. Well, I don't know about you, but I believe in democracy. And if the people in this country want a Labour government, even if remotely they wanted a right-wing fascist government, and they vote for it, well, so be it. I mean, the Conservatives are always belabouring the common market, the EU, because they say it's undemocratic. And yet our system of voting has arranged things so that every single parliamentary constituency in Surrey, the county of Surrey, just to the south west of London, is a Conservative Member of Parliament, and yet 50% of the population vote Labour. Is that democratic? Well, they're going to have their comeuppance, because in Scotland, the Scottish nationalists are very, very popular, and they may pull the plug and have a referendum to get us out, get Scotland out of its union with Britain, and stay in Europe, while the conservative Eurosceptics want a referendum to get us out of Europe. Well, boy, are we going to be on our own if we do pull out. And we keep boasting about how great it is to have our own currency, because we can lower the currency's value. We can devalue the currency and improve our exports. Well, what they don't tell you, these amateur expert economists, is that when you devalue, you also put up the price of your imports, and the cost of living goes up, and inflation comes along, and they have to put up interest rates. So it isn't hunky-dory just to be on your own as a currency. Now, I can tell you now, if the pound gets into trouble and it suits the Conservatives, they'll be all for the euro. Oh boy, will they be for the euro, if it suits them, because they believe in short-term solutions. See, Mr. Cameron boasts that 1940 was Britain's finest hour, but he doesn't mention in the same breath that it was his party which appeased Hitler. Hitler could have been stopped in 1933 with the British Navy and the French Army if we'd stopped him when he marched into the Rhineland. He could have been stopped, but Mr. Cameron doesn't mention that. Well, I'm not in favour of giving Mrs. Thatcher a state funeral. I wish her a long life, as I wish all of you out there a long life. Now, some of you were in this difficult times that we're going through, and particularly when you listen to all the doom and gloom voices on the BBC and in the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail and the Express about the goings on in Europe, which are really codswallop, actually, because it isn't going to collapse. They won't let it collapse. They would have to be out of their tiny minds to let it collapse. And if it did collapse, it would be like a tsunami washing over us. So that's it. Keep cheerful. The gift of life is so precious. God gave each one of us a life to live. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's tough. But this life is like an SAS selection course. You have to learn to live by the rules. And if you read the Bible or the Quran, because both of them were written by prophets of the same God, if you read those two books, and if we can all learn to live by those two books, then we won't have the mess the world is in at the moment. But we've a long way to go back, believe me. I'm going to close now. God bless, while it's still legal here in the UK to say God bless. 3 cheers, Mrs. Thatcher. You're not dead yet, and I wish you a great long life. but I don't really think you deserve a state funeral. Take care, everybody. Have a great Christmas, a wonderful New Year. Good luck, good health. God bless you all. Bye for now.